Hey, I think we're live. I think we've finally had some success. So a few technical difficulties, but we're here for the Perfect Balance Power Hour this evening. My name is Jana Hearn. I'm a nutritionist, and we've got Nico.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicola Rispoli, osteopath and naturopath.
So yeah, tonight we were hoping to discuss different types of fasting. So intermittent fasting has been something that's become very popular recently. And we wanted to just discuss some of the reasons why it's so popular, what's the sort of science behind it and what apparently happens in the body and its benefits, also the dangerous side, who it's suitable for, things like that. And Nico, you were bringing up some really interesting different fasting strategies as well there that sounded interesting. So there's the sort of I guess what I want to call it, but standard approach. So and then there's much more detailed and specific methods of fasting as well, which Nico's going to talk about. So I mean, in terms of the length of time or the minimum length of time for fasting, when I work with people, I do tend to say, I don't know if you agree with this, Nico, that you do have to allow for a minimum of 12 hours where you don't consume food in order to kind of reap any sort of benefit from fasting. Would you agree with this, Nico? Or would you encourage people to take supplements with it? Or I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think 12 hours is really the minimum in order to get some sort of reactions within the body. If you can do more, of course, it's great. Otherwise, it does take time to get the benefits from fasting, and there is no really any shortcut. I don't tend to advise any supplementation to some of my clients, but unless there is something that I need to be careful of, so if the person has potentially any risks for any deficiencies, or if their energy demand is quite high, then of course the circumstance changes. So in that case, if I'm advising it to an athlete, then probably I will consider it, considering that if they are still gonna train, although I advise to not train during the fasting, just to get some rest and to maybe train in a different way, like working in rather than working out. That's yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think in general that is definitely a recommendation I would give, to make sure that when you're planning to do, even if it's 12-hour fast, which if you take into consideration, that's including while you're asleep. So
Exactly.
I'm not saying you wake up in the morning, you go 12 hours, incorporate the nighttime fast, which is natural. Yeah. You're probably going to be fasting for 8 hours anyway, so just lengthen it out. However, I think sometimes, I don't know if, I'm sure you are already, but familiar with the dawn phenomenon. So in the morning, so between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m., we tend, some people, but most people probably get a surge in cortisol. Now, this is a natural bodily response. So everyone will have a certain amount of cortisol pump out, and it's just to wake you up. It's part of your circadian rhythm. It's totally normal. However, if you have a certain amount of or increased inflammation in the body, the amount of it's forgotten the word.
Cortisol.
Cortisol, yeah, there you go. I just did it like 2 seconds ago. The amount of cortisol that's released when you're doing hormones can be amplified. And for this, so even if you're fasting, I would actually suggest working out because this helps to utilize it, and maybe having some black coffee, maybe some caffeine to kind of give you that sort of, ameliorate fatigue a bit. But yeah, if you're working on maybe your inflammation, so depending on your reasons for the fast, the actual exercise can change, because sometimes it's appropriate because you're thinking, well, you don't want excess cortisol, even if you are fasting. Maybe it's best just to utilize that and bring yourself down to a nice sort of calmer, more mellow state, and continue the fast. But again, that's all depending on with men and women. I mean, if women are coming up to menstruation and they're used to exercise in the morning in a fasted state, they need to be careful, as you say. Then I would say perhaps supplement, maybe take some iron, maybe not iron pills, but like Floridic, something like that. So it does vary. Yes.
Why would you suggest someone to fast in your work?
A lot of the time, I would help people with maybe who are pre-diabetic or pre-type 2 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. So fasting, so for longer than 12 hours. So at 12 hours, you sort of have a spike in growth hormone, and that just helps the body to, utilize parts and muscle protein synthesis and start to really deplete the glycogen stores. What they've seen in a lot of trials is the markers for type 2 diabetes. So the biomarkers that they test to see if you have type 2 diabetes are HbA1c and also C-reactive proteins. And what they found is if you fast for longer, people who went overnight fasting for 13 hours or more had quite drastically reduced levels of HbA1c. They also found for the C-reactive protein, which is kind of an inflammatory marker, but also linked to type 2 diabetes, the timing of your last meal had more of an effect on the reduction in C-reactive protein in the test. So again, it's all about the length of fast and when you stop eating. So they recommended with 3 to 4 hours. In this trial alone, anyway, they noticed that. So this is where I would definitely recommend it. So it starts to bring down inflammation, and it just wakes up the insulin receptors, so your insulin sensitivity can increase. Because I think it's that constant battle against, overstimulating lots of insulin, lots of glucose, and then they seem to go dormant, or insulin resistant, the insulin receptors. It's like suddenly it goes away, all this wonderful insulin and blood glucose concentrations, and they suddenly wake up and go, oh, where'd all the insulin go? So this, to put it basically, that seems to be what happens. So absolutely, very carefully and very controlled for type 2 diabetes.
Definitely. Fasting is very interesting. I actually did my dissertation on fasting.
Oh, really?
Because, I was looking at the body composition of people, and I was looking at the appetite hormones. What is the reaction in the appetite hormones, and if there is any correlation between different body compositions. They call them somatotypes, like endomorph, ectomorph, mesomorph. And I was looking at all of this research, and the majority of the research, I'm talking about several years ago, so probably the research now is more updated. But what I remember from it was that 14 hours is really the cut point to have an effect in the balance between the hormones that increase the appetite compared to the hormones that suppresses the appetite. So ghrelin and the leptin, and as well as insulin hormone like 1, IgG, and some other stuff. So very interesting. And the research, I didn't find any significant changes in the research that I did, but it was really interesting, very interesting area. In naturopathy, we use fasting as a way of modulating pain, a little bit of recovery, especially if people have crashing in energy level. So if their energy level is really, really low. So we might use a particular way of fasting to try and maintain the energy level a little bit more steady during the day. And then we use it also for chronic pain. Some people who are in a chronic level of inflammations. We use it to target regeneration. So basically the regeneration of cells, or if there is any sort of injuries, etc. So these are really the and detoxifying, of course. So if we are looking at usually something to do with the liver or with the kidneys, any level of toxicity in these two organs, we might try a course of fast, or we might try several courses of fasting during a year, not to do one after another. So the approach is fairly conservative, and there are quite a few guidelines. So because the type of people that I see, they are either in pain or inflamed, or they have quite low level inflammations, this is basically why I tend to not advise to exercise, but rather to working in. And I'm using a term from Paul Chek. I don't know if you know it. He classifies working in and working out. So working in will be basically doing meditation, will be basically doing yoga, Pilates, breathing exercises, going for a sauna, doing mindfulness, doing visualization exercises, self-massage as well, things like this, so that they don't use a lot of energy from the body. They should recharge you after you finish them. Yeah, so after you do a session of yoga, you should feel a little bit more recharged than before. Yeah, this is why working in. And we talk a lot about healing crisis during a fast. The healing, basically, after if you do a fast, most probably there are high chances that you are gonna feel more pain than before while you are doing the fasting. And I know it's a little bit it's a bit complicated, the mechanism, but imagine that I suffer of headaches and I decide to do a fast. During the fast, I might have a healing crisis, so I might have quite a few headaches for several days, and then the idea or the theory behind is that the body is actually trying to recover, or is actually trying to repair all of the cells and the mechanism that they cause your headache. And then after the fast, you should feel a little bit better. The principle behind is because to digest food, we spend quite a lot of energy. So we do eat and we take energy from food, but the action of mastication, so ingestion of the food, breaking down mechanically but also chemically, and then excretion of the food does take quite a lot of energy. So the idea is to decrease the level of energy that the body needs to use on a daily basis, to decrease it that as much as possible, so that you should have more energy to deal with either some unresolved issues, so chronic pains, or with current issues. That is basically the philosophy behind from a naturopathic point of view. Jane? I think the screen froze a little bit. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So the people who would come to you would be more inclined to be there because of chronic pain, and they've tried everything, and this is why they would try. Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying, like, the type of clients then that would come to kind of explore this sort of therapy, I guess, it's definitely more linked to things like chronic pain, really severe inflammation. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Hi, Jen. Can you hear me now?
Oh, dear. Sorry, but I don't know if you can moment, and hopefully, get back up and running in a few minutes. I can hear you. Maybe we could, I don't know if we're back. Can you hear?
Yeah, now I can. Yes, sorry, the audio was the connection
I think we
was not
should
the
have Jenny
greatest.
there to stop us. Or maybe
That's
we can
fine,
pick it
that's
up
fine. Today,
in a moment, because I don't think
internet
Nico
is
can
very
hear me.
busy.
Oh, okay. So apologies, anyone, if there's just we can't help. Yeah, I think every day since all this, just discussing, I don't know how much you heard about just in the type of clients. So they would be having maybe severe inflammation, a lot of, chronic pain. I think though there are perhaps just have sort of heard about like intermittent fasting and really want to know kind of how it can help them. I think, what you said was really important about how you do have to take it easy while including like very long periods of fasting. They say sort of, well, up to 72 hours anyway, the longer you can go, that it will sort of increase the benefits. However, I would always recommend that maybe taking a supplement with sort of vitamins and minerals and also salts. Things like black coffee, tea, herbal teas are fine. But essentially, if you want to include 12 to 16 hours or 12 to 18 hours sort of sporadically during the week, the safest way to go about it is, as I say, just to time your meals well. And I think one of the benefits or one of the things that people like about this and what they hear about this is that it will encourage the body to utilize fat as an energy source instead of glucose. So depleting your glycogen stores to a point, not totally, but to a point that the body then says, I need another source of energy because I can't get rid of all the glucose now. So we start using the fat and lipolysis happens and we go into ketosis. And as you were saying about headaches, I think sometimes that's something to look out for. A lot of people, when they think, you know what, I think intermittent fasting is for me, they get all the information and they go for it, yet they find one of the symptoms is a headache. And it is just the body really responding to what's going on. It's kind of going, what happened because it's been living a certain way. But it will pass. And, making sure you're properly hydrated. As I say, black coffee or black tea is totally fine. Anything that's not going to increase or have you secrete insulin or a lot of insulin is absolutely fine and needs to be 12 hours. But you can do this while working, provided that you're prepared that if you do feel weak or fatigued or it's not working, that you have something readily available to eat if you feel that it's all going wrong. Because I think starting out to actually have this be part of your lifestyle and do it once a week or twice a week, I think, being prepared is one of the biggest tips I could give to people in terms of not suddenly, passing out when you're, at your desk.
Yeah, definitely.
Because the body's not used to it, it will definitely get used to it. I mean, if we think about nearly every, religion in the world, almost anyway, has some form of time where you fast. But they also have a time of feast. So the idea of fasting constantly, for long periods of time or too frequently, make sure you kind of allow yourself, time to eat wonderful, healthy, balanced meals that include all your essential nutrients as well. Because just depleting the body of everything, even though it does have its benefits in certain ways, you need to have the famine or the fast and the feast as well. But that does not mean go to Domino's and get lots of pizza or whatever.
Too much of everything can be bad, and too little of everything as well. Yeah.
Exactly, everything in moderation. But absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Now, something else I wanted to add was choose the time of the year to do it. In case you are rather than if you are doing 1 day fast or 12-hour fast, I don't think that's an issue. That usually is fun for most people. Maybe not everybody, but if you are doing a longer fast, a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks fast, I would definitely recommend pick the right type of the year, because if it's very hot out there and you are going to be sweating, etc., you are going to lose obviously much more nutrients through the sweat, and this is when a supplementation, just one of these soluble capsule, that should be fun, just to replenish a little bit of these nutrients. But if it is in between seasons, spring or autumn, that should be fine. Yeah. Some of the, if you don't mind, I just would like to mention what are things to be careful of, because you mentioned passing out. Dizziness is definitely one of the things that can happen, and this is why people who either are driving heavy machinery, or bus drivers, airplane pilots, car drivers, etc., should not fast more than a total, should not fast in a certain way. So because dizziness and a decreased attention is part of what can happen. Even the vision can become a little bit more blurred. The blood pressure is going to go down a little bit. So don't stand up and down too quickly because of this. Headaches is very common symptoms. What else? Maybe some people a little bit of nausea. They might have it. So these are the usual things that we would advise as well. So if you do have some of those things, it can very well be normal, but it's also an indication that your body wants to stay still, or you need to replenish a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit too much, the fasting. But it's also a way to get in touch with your body, to get to understand a little bit your body better. So this is, I'm personally quite a fan of fasting. We advise actually different types, like I was telling you before. Maybe we mentioned to the audience as well, if that's okay. We advise, for example, a detox fasting. That's actually quite common, which is basically divided into about 7 days. So day one, you get rid of all of the proteins. So you eat carbs and fats. That's fine. But no proteins. Proteins are the hardest to digest. That's basically the reason why. Then day two, we get rid of the carbohydrate. You can still eat some sort of, carbohydrate. When I'm talking about carbohydrate, I'm talking about complex carbohydrate, things like pasta, bread, with the simple sugar inside. But I'm not talking about fruits and vegetables. Then day three, we would just advise to eat fluids food, so soups or juices, and you can still cook them. Then on day four, only raw fruits, only raw foods in a liquid form. And then from day five, we start to do the same thing, but opposite. So we start to go back to introducing foods to our body. So day five will be now you can cook the foods and still liquid, because the digestive tract is going to be, for several days it hasn't digested any solid foods, and it's not going to be, you're not going to feel very hungry, or after you eat a little bit you're going to feel super full. The first 3 days is when you are going to feel hungry, but then afterwards actually this feeling subsides quite a bit. And then after that you introduce some solid foods, and then afterwards you introduce some carbohydrate, and then afterwards you introduce some proteins. Proteins usually are the most easy form, so usually some lightly cooked fish will do, rather than a barbecue steak or a burger. So those how we cook foods, it also matters. So definitely no fried stuff for at least a week or two after the fasting. That's very heavy to digest.
Yeah, no, very interesting. It's funny you were mentioning, I'll go back a little bit, you were saying about people who you wouldn't recommend, so based on certain type of jobs. There's also sort of your general, for me anyway, so a list of people I would not recommend fasting, any type of intermittent fasting for, would be pregnant women or breastfeeding mothers. If you're under the age of 18, I wouldn't recommend it either. If you've ever suffered from an eating disorder, particularly those anorexia nervosis, where you've been restricting food, or bulimia, so binging and purging. So if you have or are suffering from an eating disorder, definitely not the little and often frequent eating still applies. And definitely to sort of really find out first if this is the right thing for you to do. So if you have any sort of underlying health problems, please do go and discuss either with your GP or a registered nutritionist, or ask us here. to see if it's suitable for you. Just quickly, we had a question here. First time faster, how many hours in 1 week do you recommend? For me, if you were trying it out first time, I would start 1 or 2, space them out a bit. And I would suggest giving yourself 3 to 4 hours sort of before bedtime, allowing your food to digest properly, and then continuing on between the 12, maybe 14-hour mark, and then sticking to 2 days the next week. But maybe it's about lengthening the fast, not the amount of days. Would you agree, Nico?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I would also ask Susan why why does she wants to do a fast? I think that, but as a first approach, sounds about more or less the same thing that I would suggest.
Yeah. Susan, if you do want to answer, if you have any questions, you can also send us personal messages. We can get back and help you out there. But yeah, depending on what it is, I definitely agree. That we have to find out. Is it simply just wanting to lose weight or fat burning, or is it something maybe like chronic inflammation? So if we have, as you were talking about earlier, a lot of inflammation in the body, fasting can be a really great way to decrease that and get the body to kind of function properly. And I think, where we are, people are sort of scared or they don't like the idea, this generation that we're in, we're so used to snacks, be they healthy or unhealthy, and kind of constant little and often. There was a diet I remember years ago about this kind of little and often way to eat. So really, naturally, we can take quite a long time. If you think back to where we started from when we were first walking around the planet evolving, there would be times where we might not have any food and we have to hunt and forage, and we find it to be able to gorge on food. However, what we were gorging on was not Snickers and Doritos, things like that. And so it's not just about the fast. It's something I like to hammer home with people. The fasting will certainly help you. I think Susan was saying to lose weight. It will help you with fat burning or fat reduction, and it will also definitely help with reduced inflammation. As I said, in scope for longer than 12 hours. But when you reintroduce food, I mean, I would take a slightly different approach to you, Nico, although I'm quite tempted to try out one of your strategies for fasting to see the benefits. But what I would try to do is say that your meal, when you do break the fast, is healthy, balanced, and full of nutrients. You mentioned things like fish, so things like salmon that has omega-3 that will also help to benefit any inflammation. And there's a multitude of foods that I would recommend, which I don't want putting a list of below, but sticking to kind of pure whole foods. And not, even if they are very healthy, keeping the meal a standard size. You don't need to then say, okay, I've just fasted, so now I need like lots of food on my plate because I need to replenish. If it is for weight loss or fat loss, you do maybe need to consider maybe cutting back the calorie intake by maybe 20% along with the fasting. That's definitely, for me, the best strategy to go on. So keeping within that sort of 6 to 8 hour window where you're eating, it shortens the amount of time that you're eating anyway. So likelihood is your calorie intake will reduce. So kind of 2 balanced meals, one a reasonable size, and one sort of smaller meal, and maybe a healthy snack in between them, but keeping your cutoff time sharp. And keeping the food that's contained in their eating window really balanced.
But
and really
I totally agree with you. And to be honest, I always suggest everybody to have a proper chat with someone who does our level of job, because sometimes it's not about like, for example, there are quite a few conditions that I treat from the osteopathic point of view that things like chronicity, things related to the GI tract, things related to reproductive organs, etc. Things like endometriosis or cyst or fibroids, etc. And I usually get some really good results just to get rid of some inflammatory foods. Because there are people who do have this level of intolerances, and as we know, gluten, dairy, sugar, these are the most common intolerances, and very often increasing weight or fat is actually a protective mechanism from the body, because we store toxins in fat. So we use fat as a storage for toxins. This is why I'm totally against losing weight too fast, because then you are reintroducing in your body quite a few toxins, quite fast. And then the risks that you're going to put on weight is much higher. It's basically a yo-yo approach. Yeah, you lose weight and then you gain weight again. So, for example, for the lady that sent our message, I've seen that she wanted to decrease inflammation and decrease weight. I would first of all, I would definitely go through a little bit of her dietary habits to see if there is anything that might indicate us either an overuse or that might indicate some sort of intolerances, rather than going into a fast straight away. And exactly about what you said, so that we make sure that the person is number one, getting the best benefits out of the fast, and two, just make sure that this is the correct thing to do. To try it is not a problem. And then the second thing is also to make sure that there is no other underlying issue behind. Yes, the being overweight is because of my dietary habits, and it's not because of an intolerance, or is not because of, as you mentioned before, eating disorders. It's quite a very big topic in this aspect, and then there are also other things to consider. So I would definitely suggest have a chat with someone. Go take it seriously. Basically, it's something that needs to be taken seriously. Even if you do a Ramadan, there is a fast during the day, and then during the night they eat quite a lot. Or even in the Catholic aspect, there is a little bit of fasting, like you were saying before. So it's a very old practice. It helps to regenerate yourself. You should actually feel younger afterwards. It's a very cheap way to look younger, and losing weight and regenerating and decreasing stress and increasing energy. So there is a multi-layered benefits.
Absolutely. And I think it's great what you're saying about it's a lot more, not complicated, but there's more factors to consider, assuming that just taking on intermittent fasting, or for example, if you decide every once a month or every second month you're going to do a 24 and then maybe increase to 48 hour, sporadically, to really get, the autophagy started, and also increasing your stem cells. Autophagy, for example, only really happens once you hit the sort of 18-hour time. And what that basically is recycling cells and proteins, and sort of helps to clean out the body. You also mentioned something, Nico, about you would never recommend people having like fried food. This is another thing I tend to talk about. So if you are trying to fast for longer periods so that you kind of get autophagy to kick in, and maybe you're trying to decrease your AGEs, which are advanced glycation end products, which if we have a lot of foods that are kind of cooked dry on a high heat, we can have these sort of sticky substances, which is fine. The body is able to get rid of them naturally. However, if there's a large builds of them, similar to cholesterol hardening, it can cause a lot of oxidative stress and actually increase your inflammation. So definitely, I know Susan was asking about inflammation as well. So that is maybe something you want to think about in terms of longer periods of fast, past the 18 hours. Autophagy then helps to get rid of the glycation end products. However, one of the best ways is to look at your diet and how you're actually cooking your food. because that has a huge effect on the amount of AGEs or AGE in your body. And actually, they are considering now to testing the amount of AGEs as a biomarker for inflammation and oxidative stress. So actually kind of in the legal process of it being something that people can look at. So yeah, another thing to take into consideration is, not just what you're eating, how you're cooking it. And, if chronic inflammation is something that you're, concerned about, introducing foods that are antioxidant, so to relieve the oxidative stress, but also to prohibit the things that are actually causing the oxidative stress, and your AGEs might be one of those factors. So again, another reason why the fasting can help sort of clear out some of the overgrowth that's going on.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, you can take an egg, which for me is a beautiful food, and you fry it, and that's it. You have destroyed this beautiful food, and it's actually now full of trans fatty acid, and also, as you eat it, yes, it tastes nice, but it's not as good as a poached egg, for example, or a hard-boiled egg, yeah, or if the egg is really, really good, as a raw egg, for example. If it is a safe egg, obviously.
Yeah, I think even to scramble it by adding the milk or
scrambled
something,
as well.
slightly better. It might not be as good
Sure.
as boiled or poached, but at least then you're adding some liquid to it, so it is that dry heat. I think with fried eggs, I mean,
Yeah.
I love fried eggs, but I try to have scrambled or poached. The fat that you use, so if you do use oils that unsaturated fats that can't take the heat as well as, say, something like butter or coconut oil, even though we would assume that the saturated fats in the coconut oil or the butter might be worse, they can stand the heat. But keeping it, a very sort of light touching the pan, if you must have a fried egg, is the best way to do it. But if you can boil or poach, definitely do that. Also, barbecues are so popular at the moment. And barbecues are lovely, but we've got that dry heat and dry rubs and the smoke. And even though, don't get me wrong, I understand it tastes wonderful, but there's where your AGEs just massively increase, whereas if it was marinated and done in a casserole, something like that, the meat and also met in the food. So that way, that's a much better way of decreasing the AGEs. As I say, our bodies do have wonderful ways of getting rid of them naturally, but if they got too much, if you're cooking your food at high temperatures, dry a lot, having a lot of barbecue, a lot of meat, this is where you might be kind of interrupting the balance and again causing inflammation.
I agree. Totally agree.
So I don't know. Yeah, we had probably other things. We've kind of gone into a real conversation here. Trying to remember our last bits. What would as we're coming to the end, what would be your top 5 then? You can give yours and I'll give mine.
So
recommendations and tips.
So as a recommendation, I would basically make sure that I would ask, create the circumstances. So if you are going to do several hours fast, but not days, etc., I think that's fairly fun. But if you are deciding to do 2, 3, 7 days or more or a fast, I would advise take some time off from work so that you are not going to be stressed. You don't need to think about anything. So something to do when you are relaxed. So create the circumstances if you can. The second thing will be make sure that you are in quite a safe environment. So again, because the first couple of days they can be quite intense, so you want to rest, you want to sleep, you want to rest, and you don't really want to do too much. Jane, I'm talking about fasting for longer than 3 or 4 days. Another tip would be, if you have never done it before and you are unsure of, do baby steps. Do one step at a time. Totally fine to increase just the time from when you had dinner to breakfast. Yeah, just increase it a little bit of time, a couple of hours, or maybe sometime you can try to skip breakfast and have a brunch, around 11 or 12, or if you can handle up to lunch. If that's fine, maybe you can gap it even more and start to do it once a week, twice a week. Yeah, that can lead you to holding it a little bit more. Please be careful with the fasting, because what Jane said before, eating disorders, they are very common, and not eating at all is not something that we recommend at all. So fasting is something for either a short period of time, if you do it for several days, or if you're doing an intermittent fasting, it would be fine to do it twice a week for about 6 months time. But then afterwards, I personally don't feel that is a sustainable thing to do for a massive amount of time.
Yeah.
Drink plenty of water. Water is going to be the main nutrition while you are fasting, and it's great to hydrate yourself. And I would suggest the working in what I mentioned before. So relaxation techniques, breathing exercises, Pilates, yoga. I mentioned before sauna. Now, when I mentioned sauna before, I didn't quite specify, because if you have not eaten anything and if you are a bit dehydrated, to go for a sauna is going to make everything worse. So you might very well feel dizzy afterwards. So if you do decide to take part into sauna, this is when the multivitamins will be good, and definitely not to be in the sauna for too long. So go there for 30 seconds, go out, go for a cold shower, and repeat that. Yeah, so this type of sauna, rather than going in there and staying there for 10-15 minutes, that might be too much for the body. You're going to sweat too much, and you're going to lose all of the nutrients that they are not going to be that much in your body, so you're going to lose them out. So if you like sauna, then definitely either supplemented or alternate with some cold shower.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those electrolytes are important. Hence why I would say, again, my recommendations, if you are an athlete and you want to exercise in the early morning, because of what I spoke about earlier on with the surging cortisol, it is safe to run or cycle or do any kind of cardio or exercise fasted, so long as you take minerals or like electrolytes or multivitamin supplements like that. Um, Caffeine also is fine, but you can't add milk or sugar to it. Stevia, 100% pure stevia, has been shown to be absorbed quite quickly, and it doesn't spike insulin, so that's okay if you need things sweet. Electrolytes there in order to deplete your nutrients and might not feel very well at all. But if you're pre-stroke, be very careful, because not only might you feel hungrier, but you might be slightly deficient in iron at that time, and it might be something that you might want to consider. So you might want to leave it out either that week, or if you really feel, no, I'm really enjoying it, it's making me feel good, later on the day when you break your fast, maybe take a dose of Floradix just before and during the period, just to make sure that you keep everything, keep on top of everything, and you don't get really badly fatigued, because when we're not menstruating, intermittent fasting, I find anyway, okay, but then when we are, it can, you can feel not great. So do mind yourself when you're doing that. Pick your favorite meal of the day. So decide, are you a breakfast person? Are you a lunch person? Are you a dinner person? I'm definitely lunch. I can skip breakfast easily enough, and I don't have to have a very large meal for my dinner. But my lunch is when I like to have my kind of main meal. And so how I work it is that I fast from maybe 7 or 8, and then all the way through into the next day around lunchtime. Earliest would be 12, it could be 1. If I'm feeling good, maybe 2, depending how busy I am as well. And then my lunch is sort of my main meal, and then my dinner would be later and healthy. maybe a healthy snacks like apples, things like that in between. But some people, my husband, for example, is the opposite. He needs to have his breakfast. So he would be able to have breakfast and then meal for lunch, a light decent meal, but would be able to fast earlier than I would. I wouldn't be able to start my fast from 5 or 6, whereas he's totally fine with that. So definitely make it work for you. Decide your time and your favorite type of meal, and just make it as easy as possible on yourself to kind of go from this time in the evening to this time, whether it be morning or afternoon. So choose whatever you prefer. And plan and prepare and ask for advice. So really think about the reasons you're doing it, and make sure you get plenty of advice and know what you're doing, and plan and prepare. Make sure your foods are healthy, that you're eating. Fasting alone is not enough. It has to go hand in hand with a sensible, balanced diet. And make sure as well during the fasting period that you do not drink any alcohol. So if you are on full day, it might not dehydrate you, and it will, encourage the liver to overwork itself when you've got no food in your system. So yeah, I think in general those are our top tips for fasting. Fantastic advice. Thank you so much. And if you have any other questions, we always come back and look at the posts, so we're happy to answer them. So yeah, do what works for you, but be very careful, know why you're doing it, and get advice.
Bye everyone, thank you very much.